One does not often associate Northern Virginia with aviation firsts, but in early September 1908, in the first demonstration of their flying machine, Orville Wright flew the first airplane designed for the U.S. military. I'm Mark Henderson, and I'm going to briefly describe the U.S. Army's acquisition of its first military airplane, the test flights that occurred in Arlington County, Virginia in 1908, and the crash that caused history's first airplane fatality. The Wright brothers made the first flight in a powered airplane in 1903, and by 1907, they were looking for buyers for their invention. The U.S. Army had successfully used observation balloons for communications, aerial reconnaissance, and artillery spotting since the American Civil War. Consequently, the Army assigned its balloon program to the Signal Corps, which was headquartered at Fort Myer, just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. The Army solicited bids for an airplane for military use in late 1907, and at the time, the Wright brothers had the only machine that might possibly meet the Army's strict criteria, which called for a craft to first carry a pilot and one passenger as an observer, also to be able to travel at least 125 miles, travel at least 40 miles per hour, remain aloft for at least an hour, be transportable, and be designed in such a manner to permit an intelligent man to become proficient in its use within a reasonable length of time. To meet the Army's criteria, the Wright brothers transported one of their flyers to Fort Myer for testing in September 1908. The U.S. Army's Aeronautical Division had been flying observation balloons from the fort for decades, and it was home to a cadre of experienced Army aeronauts. Fort Myers Parade Field was a flat, open space, large enough to conduct the test flights, and during the first 2 weeks of demonstration and qualification tests, Orville Wright set several world records for altitude, distance, and endurance. He had twice flown with a passenger aboard. On September 9th, Orville made a world record by remaining in the air for more than an hour, circling the parade ground 55 times while flying, while more than 1,000 government officials watched. Over the next 3 days, crowds of thousands watched Orville Wright and the Wright military flyer exceed his own world records, flying a distance of more than 51 miles on September 12th. A week later, after Orville Wright replaced the military flyer's propellers with a flatter and slightly longer version, U.S. Army First Lieutenant Thomas Ethelyn Selfridge was Orville's third passenger. Selfridge was at Fort Myer that September to observe Orville Wright's demonstration flights as an official member of the Army Test Committee. First Lieutenant Frank Latham, another member of the Army's Test Committee, and Orville's first passenger a few days earlier, described the flight on September 17, 1908. He said, "Mr. Wright and Lieutenant Selfridge took their places in the machine, and it started at 5:14, circling the field to the left as usual. It had been in the air for 4 minutes and 18 seconds, had circled the field 4.5 times, and had just crossed the airplane shed at the lower end of the field when I heard a report and then saw a section of the propeller blade flutter to the ground. I judged the machine at the time was at a height of about 150 feet. It appeared to glide down for perhaps 75 feet, advancing in the meantime about 200 feet. At this point, it seemed to me to stop, turn so as to head up the field toward the hospital, rock like a ship in rough water, and then drop straight to the ground the remaining 45 feet. The first to arrive at the scene of the crash were cavalry soldiers that had been observing the flight on horseback nearby. The plane had nosed into the ground and the wreckage had crumpled on top of the pilot and passenger. The wreckage was lifted to extract Orville Wright first, who was somewhat conscious, but badly hurt with severe cuts, multiple broken ribs, and a broken leg and hip. Lieutenant Selfridge was unconscious with a severe head wound. Though he was rushed to surgery at the fort's nearby hospital, he never regained consciousness and died about 3 hours after the crash. A full honor military funeral was held it for Selfridge at Fort Myer, and he was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery, a few hundred yards from the site of the crash. With the distinction of becoming the first fatality of a plane crash, Selfridge was respected as a heroic martyr to the science of aviation. His father, a retired Navy admiral, insisted on paying for the monument that was built to mark his gravesite. Erected a year after his death, the monument was the largest in the cemetery at the time. Its base is 13 feet square, and its shaft rises 40 feet from the ground. It sits on a hill overlooking the Potomac River, and its western face is adorned with a large bronze tablet. The monument is unchanged since it was erected a year after his death, and a cemetery gate near the crash site was given his name commemorating the 50th anniversary of the flight tests. The public may visit the Selfridge gravesite in Section 3 of the cemetery, grave 2158. Orville and his brother Wilbur went on a year later to continue the flight tests. The Army did buy the Wright Flyer for $25,000, and the rest is aviation history. Thank you.